Okay, folks, here we are again, another episode of My Life with Robert Burns. Douglas Mackenzie and Jim Thompson here again, talking to one of our cronies from around the Burns world. How are you doing, Jim?
Doing absolutely great. Now I've got my toilet fixed, Douglas. Hi, everybody.
Excellent. Today, we're pleased to tell you that the crony that we're talking to is the Junior Vice President of the Robert Burns World Federation. Cronies everywhere. Please welcome Alan Beck.
Hi, folks. Hope you're all well.
Certainly are, Alan. And Jim's got his loo fixed, so that lets us get started. That'll get the listeners wondering what's going on inside the.
He's looking a wee bit flushed here.
It all happens in the My Life with Robert Burns studio. Okay, Alan, we usually start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind giving us whatever you can on Alan Beck.
I will certainly. I was born in Bellshill in 1966, which seems only like yesterday, but yeah, it's 55 years ago. Lived in Coatbridge for the first 20 years of my life, and went to high school there. Was involved in music from a very early age, through school, through various different teachers outside. I had piano lessons, I had singing lessons. It's actually where I first got really involved in singing Burns, although like a lot of families, we had folk that would sing at the drop of a hat. My mother and father would sing at the drop of a hat at parties and stuff like that. And there was always Scots songs came out. There was always Burns songs. Eubanks and Braes was a real favourite of my mother and father. I kind of grew up in a normal working class Coatbridge family, I suppose. Went to a local school. I was the head boy at the school. I think probably because I was kind of interested in things that most people in Coatbridge didn't seem to be interested in, which was poetry, songs, theatricals and stuff like that. Played a lot of sport at school as well, but I was very interested in the arts side of it. And in fact, my teacher, who was actually the head of art, had asked me to come and take part in a competition for the Monkland Speakers Club, and I wrote a speech called the Save the Bachelor Society, and I won the competition on this, and it was kind of my first thing about public speaking that I had done, was to stand up and give this particular speech. So there was a lot of kind of local stuff that I sort of picked up and absorbed through my family and through the school, to the extent that I'd been doing a lot of singing for local organisations, and my teacher in school said, "I think you should audition for the Royal Scottish Academy of Music. I think you've got a really promising voice." So I went to speak to my mum and dad about it, and they were over the moon. I mean, it's not the sort of thing you think about when you're a working class boy from Coatbridge, that you would go on to, to study opera. But my parents just thought the idea of studying music was fantastic. So yeah, I auditioned, I got in, much to my surprise. Realised when I got there I was a very small fish in a very large pool. Because there were so many talented people there, but well, you just you roll up your sleeves, you get your head down, and you do the work, you do the practice, etc. And that was a marvelous experience, because that took me all over the world, really. And at despite the fact that I was singing opera and studying opera, I was always interested in all forms of music. So I still carried on. I mean, I've been singing at Burns Suppers now I'm 55 this year, so I've been singing at Burns Suppers for over 40 years, that's for sure. Probably for 45 years, because I think my first one would have been around about the age of 10. So yeah, I kind of I went from studying at the conservatoire in Glasgow. I went to Ireland, to Dublin, and made my operatic debut in Dublin. Just after that, I won a couple of competitions in singing Wagner, and because of that, I ended up as a principal tenor in the State Opera in Stuttgart, and I was there until 2002. Before going, my wife and I decided we would get married. So Polly is Liverpudlian, and we had I actually had met her in the conservatoire. So we had a wedding here, and then went off to Germany and lived in Germany for about 7 years. Came back here 2002 and formed a group called Caledon, the Three Scottish Tenors, and that was terrific. That really did take us all over the world, to the Sydney Opera House, Vancouver, New York, Berlin. Did months and months and months of cabaret in Berlin, believe it or not. The Germans absolutely love Scotland. They love it if you sing folk songs, because they love their own folk songs, but they can't sing them because folk songs are obviously a patriotic thing, and the Germans have a problem with patriotism since the Second World War, especially the young people. So to have people coming over from Scotland dressed in their very exotic kilts, which is what they think when you're in a kilt, wow, that's really exotic. So we would go and sing Scots songs to the Germans, and they absolutely loved it. And to kind of make the performances that wee bit extra special, we did 3 German traditional folk songs, which they wouldn't dare to sing, but like folk songs would do for any country, it really touches you. And they loved us. So we did over about 200 performances alone in Berlin. Yeah, so that's kind of been my my sort of I suppose resume to date, except to say for the fact that I also studied to be a music teacher, and in fact I've been a principal music teacher in a local secondary school in Greenock for 10 years anyway. Yeah, so it's been eventful, I suppose.
So apart from your voice, you play other instruments?
Yes, I play the piano, and I suppose I've got about 15 chords on the guitar that I strum away. Used to take guitar with me on tour and learn the chords for Beatles songs and stuff like that I thoroughly enjoyed. But no, I'm a singer, and obviously, you know, you accompany your pupils and things. My wife, who I met at the conservatoire, is also a singer, and we often play for each other. We'll often go out as a duo, and she'll play for me and I'll play for her. So yeah, I compose as well. That was one of the things that I also studied at the conservatoire. So in fact, I had 3 children's musicals commissioned by the Scottish Arts Council, or Creative Scotland as it is now. The first one for the local authority here, when the Tall Ships race came to Greenock in 2011, I think it was, called Tall Ships Tales, and then they commissioned me for 2 more over the next few years. So I suppose I'm a jack of all trades, but not really a master of any.
And is Caledon going to be coming back after we're allowed to go and watch concerts?
Oh, we're all too old for it now, I think, Dougie. I think no one wants to see my knees in a kilt anymore, if I'm being perfectly honest. No, I mean, there's a kind of natural end for those types of things, and really, it was a touring group. You spend your money on tour, and as you get older, the prospect of being 3 months in a hotel room on your own becomes less and less attractive. Touring is actually, it kind of seems glamorous, and it is a younger man's game. I think when you're young, being able to go to all these, you know, exotic places, yeah, it's probably quite exciting at the time. But actually, when you come off a plane after an 8-hour flight, and then you have to have a sound check and sing that evening, and then get on a bus afterwards, and get taken a 2-hour journey to your hotel when you're then getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to the airport to fly somewhere else. It's actually quite a lot of hard work. It's definitely a young man's game. So apart from the fact that no one wants to see my knees, I don't think my knees would be up to it.
And in your time in Stuttgart, was that a kind of every night of the week performance? I always think of opera as something that is particularly special, and it's a kind of, a major performance, maybe once a month or something like that. Were you doing it more regularly?
There'd be, a house the size of Stuttgart, which is one of the biggest opera houses in the world. Stuttgart would have an opera on every night. Now, if they were to put on, say, probably in the region of 20 operas per year, then if each opera would have maybe something like 15 performances, that would kind of take up the year. So you might be, as the principal tenor, and I think in my first season, I would have been involved in 4 operas. So that would have been 4 times 15 performances, about 60 performances in the first year. So you've also got to think that while you're doing these performances, you might think, well, that's great because he's only performing 60 times. But actually, in the days that you're not performing, you're rehearsing the next opera. So you've got like 5 weeks of rehearsal where you're doing it every day, and then you start the performances. And as soon as that performance run starts, you're then rehearsing the next opera, and you're spending 5 weeks doing that. So 60 performances doesn't sound like you sing a lot, but you're actually singing every day. And of course, when you are doing that, your voice becomes stronger and stronger. It's like any muscle group. The voice is controlled by muscles. And like any muscle group, the more you exercise them, the stronger they become. So yeah, you do take time off, but you keep the voice going all the time.
Good. And how was life in Germany? Is that where your kids were born?
Kids were actually born in Liverpool. We went to Germany first. When we came back, we had the kids. So yeah, Stuttgart's quite a conservative German town, very, very different from Berlin. Berlin's like anything goes. Stuttgart is in the southern part, southwest part of Germany, and it's quite conservative. Despite the fact that it's a big city, it's a very wealthy city. It's the home of Porsche. It's the home of Mercedes. It's the home of Bosch. There's a lot of kind of industry and a lot of money in Stuttgart. So of course, typical of the Germans, they put the money into arts. They put the money into keeping their streets clean and their buildings clean. They put the money into their transport system. It's life in Germany was good. I enjoyed it. I had gone to live with a German family for a couple of months before I actually properly moved out and went to German lessons in a language school there. So I could speak the language. And in fact, when Caledon went to Berlin a few years later, we presented the shows in German, and I presented all my stuff in German to the audience because I've been speaking it for a few years. The funny thing is when you're training to be an opera singer, and especially as someone like myself who was doing a lot of Wagner, singing in a lot of German, your pronunciation becomes very, very good because you've been really trained to pronounce it well. But that's not the same as speaking a language. So when I first went, I'd learned some phrases the way anyone who was going to a language for a country for the first time and trying to learn a language would do. So I would learn to say, hello, my name is Alan Beck, I'm an opera singer, etc., etc. And I would learn that in German. And of course, because my pronunciation was really good because of all the years of opera training, because my surname is Beck, which is it's all over Europe, the name Beck. There's quite a lot of Becks in the telephone directory in Stuttgart if you look in it. So they would see Herr Beck, and I would turn up and say, hello, mein Name ist Beck, ich bin Opernsänger, ich wohne in Zuffenhausen, which is a part of Stuttgart. And then they would say something and I would say, I'm sorry, could you say that a little bit slower, please? And I'd say that in German. Entschuldigen Sie bitte, können Sie ein bisschen langsamer sprechen? And they would look at me and you could see in their face, they're thinking, why does Mr. Beck, who must come from Hanover or somewhere like that, need me to speak more slowly and more clearly? And then I would have to explain to them, well, actually, I'm not German, I'm from Scotland and I'm only learning the language. But the interesting thing that I discovered is if you begin a relationship with someone in their language, they are much, much more likely to always talk to you in their language. Whereas if I had just spoken to them in English, they would have spoken back to me in English, and their English would have been far superior to my German. So the idea of then learning German from them wouldn't really have happened.
Mhm. With so much touring and visiting so many countries, are there any stories, any highlights?
Certainly being in cabaret in Berlin for so long. But Berlin was a fantastic place, really fantastic place. But I think the real highlight would have been the tour of Australia and New Zealand and singing at the Sydney Opera House. We were asked by a company a production company who puts on shows, and the shows that they put on were, generally speaking, shows that showed some sort of foreign culture. Now, there's obviously a lot of Scots in Australia. And in fact, this particular company, which was based in Sydney, was run by a guy called McKinnon. So Andrew McKinnon. So he obviously loved the idea, and he'd seen us singing at Hampden. He was a keen follower of football, and he'd seen us singing at Hampden, and he thought, wouldn't it be fantastic to get these guys out and do a Scottish show? So they contacted the website, and I got into negotiation with a guy, and he really wanted to bring out something like the Scots Guards or something like that. And so I did actually make inquiries. But at that time, which is quite poignant now, the Queen Mother had just passed away. And the next royal that they were expecting to pass away would have been the Duke of Edinburgh, who at that time would have been probably 80. So they were probably expecting he was next, and they wouldn't let the Scots Guards out the country, apparently, in case they had to have them for his funeral. Well, of course, the old fella lasted another 20 years after that.
Yeah.
So they really wanted something like that, and I thought about it, and I contacted the Scottish Fiddle Orchestra, and I said, how would you fancy if a cut down version of the Fiddle Orchestra would come out to Australia and do a tour of Australia and New Zealand with us? And they were delighted to do it. So actually we went out with the Scottish Fiddle Orchestra. We were in 18 days, Australia and New Zealand, and we did 15 shows in 18 days. Now, that was really tough going. We flew from Glasgow to London, London to Singapore, Singapore to Perth, got into Perth after a 28-hour flight, got to the hotel at 2 o'clock in the morning, body clock all over the place.
Yeah.
And then I was on stage for a sound check about 5:30 that evening, and I could not produce a sound. I don't mean I couldn't sing. I could not produce any sound. I couldn't speak. I had totally lost the ability to phonate. And what was absolutely fantastic was my two colleagues in Caledon totally understood the situation, and we really did pull together for each other. And we just sort of thought, right, okay, what can we do? What can you actually sing? And it was precious little, right in the middle of my voice. Right, okay, I'll take that phrase, you take that phrase, I'll take that phrase. We went on, we did it, and the next day in the Western Australian, which is their big newspaper, the review about the show said all three tenors were in magnificent voice.
Very good.
I was in magnificent silence, let me tell you.
The power of miming.
Absolutely. I did a lot of miming that night. By the time it came to the show and I tried to warm up, I did have a little bit more to my voice, but I mean, it was precious little. That was a big highlight. I suppose in terms of burns, although we started all of those shows with A Man's a Man for All That, and it brought the house down. Absolutely brought the house down every time. But I suppose in terms of Burns, the most interesting story would be, I think just before we went to Australia, it was just when we were negotiating actually. I got a phone call from a guy who had seen us again at Hampden, who was putting on a kind of Burns supper in the United Nations in New York. And in fact, the United Nations Secretary General, Kofi Annan, was going to give the very first Robert Burns lecture in the United Nations. And the guy phoned up and said, would you be interested in singing at it? I said, let me think about that. Yes. And so, yeah, went to New York and again sang A Man's a Man. That always brought A Man's a Man always brought the house down. Sang A Man's a Man and a few other Burns stuff, and was there at the very first Robert Burns lecture at the United Nations given by Kofi Annan. Interestingly, the Jack McConnell, who was the First Minister at the time, had another engagement and couldn't go, and Jim Wallace, who was Deputy First Minister, came out, and at the end of it we had a drink with Jim Wallace, who's just such a lovely guy, and we'd got him to sing with us because people were saying sing. This is kind of a little reception afterwards, so we said we'll sing, but only if Jim Wallace sings with us. So Jim Wallace's first ever public performance as a singer was with Caledon at the United Nations building in New York for the inaugural Robert Burns lecture by the Secretary General Kofi Annan. In terms of other Burns suppers, one of the other most interesting ones was for Donald Trump. Did a Burns supper for Donald Trump in Trump Tower in New York about 2008. And I think the Scottish government were sort of courting him at that time because they really wanted him to build his golf course up in Aberdeen, and the whole kind of the whole kit and caboodle that was going with it, the clubhouse, the hotel, the houses, etc. And so the Scottish government had called us and said, would you come and do a Burns supper that we're doing for Donald Trump in Trump Tower? That was very interesting. We addressed the haggis at that and then sang again, A Man's a Man, probably. Can't remember what we sang, but it'd be A Man's a Man, and Gae bring to me a pint of wine, and we had a number of Burns songs. We used to do quite a lot of Burns things.
Excellent. Well, before we got on to talking about Burns, for which I'll pass over to Jim, your story about the Sydney Opera House reminded me of our trip to Australia, which was a similar journey. I was with you on the journey. I was with you on the outside of the Opera House, but we never get in because we went for a walk in the park next to the Opera House and got locked in. So, but that's another story. Anyway, not trying to trump your story. I'll pass over to Jim.
Alan, just when you mentioned doing cabaret in Berlin, the picture that came to mind was Joe Gray and Lisa Minnelli in that wonderful Bob Fosse movie that I'll watch so regularly. It's just a wonderful thing. However, how did you get started with Burns?
Well, basically, my family were very, very interested in singing. My mum and dad were great singers, actually. And there was a lot of Burns get sung about the house. So I kind of started to pick up Burns songs. I kind of realised as I got older and someone would ask me to sing something, and they would say, you know, X, Y, and Z is going to accompany you on the piano. And that person would phone me up and say, well, what are you going to sing? Have you got the music? And I would think to myself, no, I don't have the music because I've never seen the music of this ever. I've never actually seen it printed. It suddenly struck me that most of the songs that I knew, certainly Scots songs, but also MGM songs and things like that, my parents absolutely loved Mario Lanza and Doris Day and Sinatra, and they would watch all the MGM films, Gene Kelly and all of these people. And I had just kind of, you know, absorbed all these songs and I knew them. I'd never actually seen the music for them. So I'd kind of been singing Burns songs as a boy, without really knowing them. But I think the first Burn Supper actually I was ever at would have been around about the age of 10, and it was in primary school, with a deputy head teacher called Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown was very, very old school. Ronnie Brown used to snap his fingers like that. It's all he did. When you snapped your fingers, you turned around to see what Mr. Brown was wanting. And he came to me and asked if I would sing and speak at a Burn Supper this is in primary school, that he was putting on in primary school, and everything was to be done by the primary pupils. I'm not sure there'd be that many primary schools that would do that now, but certainly the standard that he produced was absolutely tremendous. He asked me to sing and speak, and in fact I toasted the lassies. I can remember actually asking what a toast to the lassies was, and he said, you have to speak about women. You have to speak about women in a very nice way. Robert Burns had a number of women in his life. I had no idea what that meant, but I just assumed it must have been his aunties and his sisters. And he said, and you can tell a joke in your speech if you want. And I remember that the girl who was replying to me, and I remember saying something along the lines of, she got confused because she started a new job on a building site, and she got confused when she asked where her shovel was. And the guy pointed to a row of them and said, take your pick. And the whole thing about the idea of the confusion between a shovel and a pick, I thought was absolutely hilarious. But like you, Jim, nobody there laughed. So so I do remember that from it. And I also remember singing Ye Banks and Braes at that particular thing. So that would have been about the age of 10, I think. There was a great book which came out, Oxford University Press, by Cedric Thorpe Davy and George McVicker. And it was the Oxford book of Scottish songs. And one of the songs in it was O Lay Thy Life in Mine, Lass. And my teacher at school had asked me to come and do sing at a Burn Supper. He was putting on a Burn Supper for his Rotary Club and asked me if I would come and sing. And he specifically said to me that he would like it if I could sing this song. And that wasn't a song that my parents had sung. And he produced this book. And he gave me the book and he said, there's a book for you, because I think you might use this over the years. And it was the Oxford Scottish Songbook. So I learned O Lay Thy Life in Mine, Lass. And that was one of the very first songs that I actually learned from the music, that I hadn't just absorbed by hearing other people sing the song. So that was kind of how I sort of got into Burns in the first place. And of course, once you've sung at a Burn Supper and you've done a half decent job, and especially if you're a wee boy and you're free, then everybody there who enjoyed it and who would be putting on a wee Burn Supper for their church or would putting on a wee Burn Supper for the Monkland Speakers Club or whatever would then say to me, would you come and sing a couple of wee songs at our Burn Supper? So I mean, you guys like myself will have been to an umpteen Burn Suppers where some wee boy or some wee girl from the local school has come in and given a few wee songs. And that was me. That's kind of how I got started in it. The local music festival, the Lanarkshire Music Festival, I remember going to sing Burns at that in Hamilton Town Hall. So I kind of got into it that way, really through the singing initially, and then eventually through the poetry.
You're also, now I know you obviously as a member of Greenock Burns Club, the Mother Club, and I think it'd be nice if you told everybody about the Mother Club, because I think it's important that we understand where it comes from and what it actually is. And as a fan of the Mother Club, I think it needs support as well.
Well, yeah, I'm very proud to be, as we speak, the immediate past president of the Mother Club, but not for much more than about the next week, because there'll be a new president coming in, and I'll kind of shuffle down the list of past presidents as you do. Yeah, so the Mother Club has been going a long, long time. It's probably one of the oldest institutions in Inverclyde outside the church, I suppose. There's a Masonic lodge here in Greenock, which is 1728. Another one 1790. But the Mother Club is right up there. Mother Club dates from the 21st of July, which is a significant date, 1801. Funnily enough, I've just been doing a wee bit of research about it today. The first meeting which was held was part of an organisation called the Greenock Airship Society. Greenock, like Paisley and like Glasgow, had a lot of immigrants from Ayrshire. Paisley, especially because of the weaving and obviously handloom weaving being a big important thing in Ayrshire. A lot of Ayrshire people went to Paisley, but a lot of Ayrshire people came to Greenock because of the expanding docks and the work opportunities as we turned from a kind of agricultural society to a more industrial society. So you had a lot of Ayrshire people coming to this town, and they formed themselves into the Greenock Ayrshire Society for mutual relief. People struggling for money, etc., etc. Obviously, Ayrshire people have a great affinity with the man from their own county, Robert Burns, and within the Ayrshire Society, a wee group of them got together on the 21st of July 1801, and they formed themselves into a wee Burns Appreciation Society within the Ayrshire Society. That wee Appreciation Society had its first annual celebration. God help you in the Greenock Burns Club if you call it a Burns Supper, the annual celebration. And they had that on the 29th of January 1802. The reason, as you gentlemen will know, being that at the time, from I think it was Curry, in his book, he had said that Burns had been born on the 29th of January. It was only a year or so later that they discovered from the parish registers that it was the 25th of January. So the 29th of January 1802 was the first annual celebration of Greenock Burns Club. And the club has been going from that time, and really at the height of the kind of Burns cult in mid-Victorian times. It kind of came into its own really through one of its past presidents, Colin Ray Brown, who was born just down the road from where I currently am. Colin Ray Brown was the guy who was really fundamental in the beginning of the Burns Federation. He was the guy with the original idea who proposed that the Federation should have an annual journal dedicated to Burns called the Burns Chronicle. Colin Ray Brown was responsible for so many things in the Burns world, and he was a Greenockian. So really towards the end of the 19th century, Greenock Burns Club, with this great Greenockian who by this time was down in London, in tandem with him, really were doing a lot of things to push Burns and the memory of Burns, to keep it at the forefront of people's minds. So the club has, I think, was one of the very first to have its own competition for school children. Part of the competitions were things like, believe it or not, wildflower collecting, whereby you collected wildflowers that Burns had mentioned, like daisies and stuff like that. There was the singing, there was the speaking, but the club's also very interested in Scots language in general, not just Burns. So there's a lot that the club does. In fact, the club was one of the very first to have to publish an edition of Robert Ferguson's works in 1810. It's been very much a central organisation in the town of Greenock, and in fact in the whole of Inverclyde. It's very well known by the inhabitants of Greenock, and it was a real honour to be president of the club when you look at the history, when you look at the honorary presidents who have come and given the immortal memory, there's an astonishing number of really eminent professors who have come and done it. And even Jim Thompson has been there himself, giving it. So yeah, honorary presidents of Greenock Burns Club are very eminent men.
You get the odd dud, right enough.
Well, Alan, I'm glad you got him to do an immortal memory, because you certainly wouldn't have wanted him there to sing. But I think we could maybe take this opportunity to see if we can persuade you to give us a song.
Unaccustomed as I am to public singing, Dougie, I could give you a wee verse of, well, what about O Lay Thy Life in Mine Lass that I was talking about earlier?
Sounds perfect.
O lay thy life in mine, lass, in mine, lass, in mine, lass, and swear on thy white hand, lass, that thou wilt be mine, a slave to love's unbounded sway. He oft hath wrought me mickle way, but now he is my deadly fay. Forever to remain. O lay thy life in mine, lass, in mine, lass, in mine, lass, and swear on thy white hand, lass, that thou wilt be mine.
Yeah.
That was fantastic, Alan. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, Alan, that's the first time I've heard you sing, and I've got to say there are singers and there are singers, and you, my dear friend, are the latter.
I'll take that as a compliment, Jim.
Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely, I genuinely thought that was absolutely wonderful. But while I've got you anyway, you need to speak a wee bit about what's happening in the Federation, because as we've been talking to people in various aspects of this, a lot of it that they think of as past federations, and the Federation in the last 10, 15 years has changed completely. So tell us a bit about what you're doing and what's happening.
So I think lockdown has actually brought some benefits to the Burns movement. That's the first thing I would say. You know, the Greenock Burns Club has been having Zoom meetings, Zoom lectures. New Cumnock has got this terrific idea. The Federation has been holding lectures all on Zoom, and it's been given people the opportunity to basically to see Burns things going on that they might not normally be able to see, because the Robert Burns World Federation is indeed that. It's a world federation. So for instance, when we've been having Zoom meetings for the board, we've been doing it at particular times. The representative, the director from the Pacific Rim, who's based near Melbourne, he's been getting on at 6 o'clock in the morning for him. We've got the senior vice president, Henry, who's in Calgary. Henry's been getting on to the meetings at 12 o'clock in the afternoon for him. And we've been having the meetings here in this country at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the evening. The reason for that is that we've had so much great feedback from people who have seen the stuff that that we have been presenting. that they never really see anything that the Federation is doing, because any events that we would normally do would be live and they would take place, generally speaking, in Scotland. But really, Robert Burns is a world cult. And we really have to remember that, of course, the majority of our members are based in Scotland, but we really want people abroad to be able to share in as much about Robert Burns as we can. And that's why what you guys are doing is of great importance. Because let's face it, I've never been to your Burns Club. I've never been, I don't even think I've been to New Cumnock, to be honest. So I wouldn't know what you guys are doing, but I've been watching the stuff that you've put on YouTube, and it's brilliant. Some of the guys that you've had on, I don't know them. I've never met them, but I feel like I know them now because I've listened to them and I've listened to them talking about it, and I've seen the passion that they have for Burns. So it's really important for the Federation that we make this the best of this opportunity with Zoom. That's the first thing I would say. In terms of the competitions, the school competitions, obviously, schools have been shut for the better part of the last year. That's going to be a big problem because we need to hit the ground running when we start back. We need to make sure that that pupils are encouraged immediately to get on with learning their Burns songs and their Burns poems and things, because you know they will be the people who do become members of Burns clubs as they get older. I'm not a great one for believing that Burns clubs are all for 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. I mean, some people come to Robert Burns later in life, and that's fine. Maybe Burns takes you know, a wee bit of kind of understanding about life to kind of really get into it and to really let it get under your skin. It certainly got under my skin the older I got. Although, of course, I still would maintain the fact that I've, you know, had a great grounding in it. So the Federation is looking for opportunities to get young people more involved. In terms of the actual, what the organisation does about Burns and about the Scotch language in general, we've taken the plunge and decided, you know what, we're going to hold a festival in Kilmarnock in the summer. Hopefully we can do it face to face. It's going to be called the Killie Burns Summer, and it will take place between the 25th and the 31st of July, which kind of ties in with Burns' funeral and the anniversary of the publication of the Kilmarnock edition. We just want people to get as much opportunity to enjoy Burns as they can. But one of the things I've been particularly involved in is the local college here, West College Scotland, has a wee drama degree course. And I've been involved in helping a group of young girls, they're 20, 21, 22, with their degree, because they're doing a thing called Burns Women. And it's actually a Zoom meeting. And it's a play about a Zoom meeting of Jean Armour, Nellie Kilpatrick, Agnes McElhose, Agnes Burns, and it's all of these women from Jessie Lures, all of these women from Burns Life, who are basically Zooming together to discuss Robert, because Robert's phone has been found and he's got a wee Tinder account on it, and he's been seeing some other lasses. So it's these, let me tell you right now, these girls absolutely love this, because I've tried to make Burns relevant to their lives. So they understand the idea about a guy that they fancy who's got umpteen lasses that his eye is roving towards. And it's something that they can kind of hook onto. But each one of them in this little play has a wee soliloquy. And in the soliloquy, they were basically said, you must recite Burns. And if it's a song, for instance, Agnes McElhose talks about A Fond Kiss, it said, no, you can't recite that. You need to sing that. So these girls have got right into it. And so the idea of kind of making things a bit more contemporary, if you think about it, any decent writer, and especially Robert Burns, no matter what they write about, it's as relevant today. In fact, Burns is more relevant today than he was in the 18th century, because basically everything that he complained about, we still have. Everything that he enjoyed about life, we don't have as much of. So in fact, I think he's even more relevant. Burns was a great environmentalist. Look at what we're doing to the planet. He'd have been absolutely horrified at the way that rainforests disappear and stuff like that. So we're trying to make it relevant to younger people and hopefully instill a wee bit of a love of Burns into them. But the Federation goes on. And the reason the Federation goes on is simply this. It's absolutely my belief, and I spoke about Colin Ray Brown before. It's absolutely my belief that the reason we still have Burns suppers nowadays is that Colin Ray Brown and Captain Snedden, the guys from Kilmarnock, got together and formed a federation in Burns' name to keep clubs together and to keep putting that message out there. And it's really, really important. So anybody like yourselves who are doing anything like you're doing, send it in, send the links into the Federation office. We'll get them on the website, because you'd be shocked at the number of people who look at the website. It's really going up in great numbers. So the more that we can get on that website from clubs, the better. We want people all over the world to have a single point that they can go to when they can see the best of Burns, and they can see ordinary people, because we're all ordinary people, doing actually demonstrating their love of Burns. What you guys are doing here demonstrates a real love of Robert Burns to get together. It's such a great social thing that you're doing. And that's the sort of thing that I would suggest that all clubs should be trying to take advantage of, this kind of Zoom revolution.
Well, that's certainly a good plug for the Federation. And I've got to be honest and say that this, particularly this year, 2021, doing an online Burns supper, basically, instead of, the real thing, and not just the Federation, but many clubs have done that as well. Yeah. And that, for me, has been a great step forward. Although you do lose the camaraderie, I suppose. But however, you've mentioned a couple of times, and I know we're coming up towards the end of our time with you, but you've mentioned a few times a song that, for me, in any case, is an anthem for mankind, and covers all the points that you've just so eloquently spoken about. Can you say a word or two, and if you've got the courage, give us a wee song?
Well, Jim, I make no bones about it. I'm a committed Freemason. I'm actually the Provincial Grand Secretary of Renfrewshire West, which is a fairly wee province. We've only got 9 lodges in the province, but it's more than enough for me, let me tell you. Burns and his Freemasonry to me is a big, big thing. I particularly love this song because of the Freemasonic element in it. However, take that away, and think about the rights of man, think about Thomas Paine, think about the French Revolution, the American Revolution, people standing up for the rights of the individual man, which is it's just incredibly important. And as I said, it's almost more important nowadays than it ever was. This song to me is, I don't know, it's one of Burns', if not his greatest achievements. It's certainly one of his greatest achievements. I'd have to put it alongside A1 Kiss for different reasons, but this particular song to me is a hair on the back of the neck song. There's no question about it. When you stand up and do this at a Burns supper, I have to sit down afterwards. But listen, I'll give you, since we're talking about it, okay, I'll give you the last verse, okay? Because the last verse to me encapsulates everything about the Burns movement. It's about giving a hand to somebody because that you feel that person is the same as you. Then let us pray that come it may, as come it will, for all that sense and worth o'er all the agree and all that. For all that and all that, it's coming yet. For all that, that man to man, the world shall brothers be for all that.
Excellent. Very, very powerful. And what a way to finish this episode. That was fantastic, Alan. Thank you for that. And thank you for giving up your time to tell us about your life with Robert Burns. Thank you.
Dougie, Jim, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure to spend my afternoon with you. And let's hope that we keep safe and well, and we'll see each other face to face at a Burns event soon. I'll be coming down to Newcombe with my chain on, let me tell you.
Thanks very much. You'll be very welcome, Alan, anytime.
Cheers.